Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar where I'm going to show you how to create a time trial activity in Articulate Storyline, and then show you how to use this to create a leaderboard on your Totara site. My name is Jordan Ash. I'm the site administrator and course creator for the Totara community. I've been in my role at Totara for about 7.5 years, but I've been working with Storyline for just over a decade now. Just a quick word of warning before I do get started. To get the most out of this webinar, you will need to have a good understanding of Articulate Storyline. We'll be covering quite a lot of ground in the next 30 minutes, so it'll be quite difficult to follow if you are new to Storyline. We'll be using features including triggers, numeric variables, motion paths, and quizzes. So if you're not familiar with these features, then you can always return to this webinar in a few weeks' time. There will be a recording of this webinar available from tomorrow, so you'll be able to watch this back and pause and rewind as you wish. So just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. This session is being recorded, and as I said, there'll be a recording put up in the community tomorrow. You can also ask any further questions you might have in the community about this webinar, and I'll do my best to answer them. For those of you who are not familiar with the Totara community, the Totara community is a free site which has a community of over 15,000 users. You can find forums and workspaces to discuss all things Totara and e-learning. We also have hundreds of courses which teach you how to administrate a Totara LMS site. These courses are made up of activities such as tutorial videos, system simulations, quizzes, and more. The community has been built using Totara LMS, so you can also get a good example of what a Totara site can look like. It's completely free to join, so if you don't have an account yet, feel free to create a new account and introduce yourself to the community. So in this webinar, I'm going to start off by showing you an example of a timed activity with a leaderboard, which is available on the community site. I'll then show you how to create something like this in Storyline, including how to track the duration of an activity using variables, how to submit a variable as a score in Storyline, and then I'll finish up by showing you how to create a leaderboard of scores in your Totara site. So let's start by taking a look at an example of what we're going to create. This activity is available for you to try in the community. I believe Matt's been putting the link in the chat if anyone wants to have a go at that. So if I click into this activity, you can see that I've got a task here on the right, which I need to do. So I need to create a H5P accordion activity in this Totara course. I need to add 2 accordion sections and mark it as complete when the user views the activity. So when I get started, you can see in the bottom right, I've got a timer, which is going up. And as I click through the activity, that's still going up. So I need to add an accordion activity to this course. So I'll scroll down, select accordion, and I'll add some text for the title and text in my first panel, and then add some text in one more panel. And then I need to mark this as complete when a user views it. And then I'll save. And so when I complete the task, I can see my time. And then when I go back to the course, I'll be able to see my name in the leaderboard. Although my time was a bit slow to be appearing on the first page of this leaderboard, I'm probably somewhere towards the 4th page. So how has this been created in Storyline? For this webinar, I've simplified the interactions slightly, but the ideas behind everything are still the same. On the first slide, we have our instruction text and a button to get started. The button jumps the user to the second slide. This next slide is what we will be tracking the time on. This is a very simple simulation. We have 5 screenshots on this slide. Screenshots 2, 3, 4, and 5 start in the hidden state when a user enters the page. So only slide 1 is visible at the start. Over each screenshot, there is a hotspot positioned above where we want them to click on the slide. And we have 2 triggers associated with these hotspots. Each of these hotspots changes the state of the next screenshot in the sequence from hidden to normal, and also changes the state of the next hotspot in the sequence from hidden to normal. So when a user clicks hotspot 1, the state of screen 2 is changed to normal, and the state of hotspot 2 is changed to normal. And this is the same for all of the other hotspots until hotspot 5. Hotspot 5 just jumps the user to the next slide. So we're going to want to find a way of calculating exactly how long our users are spending on this slide. The final slide in this scene just shows a congratulations message to the user and gives them a button to return to the course page. So let's have a quick preview of this to see how it looks. We've got a task text here, and we need to change the default language to French for this user. So I'll change the language to French and then save changes. And we get our congratulations message. So that seems to all be working. So you can see that each correct click is revealing the next screenshot. I'll exit this preview now and then go to my second slide, where I'm going to start creating the timer for my activity. To get started, I'm going to add a simple shape to my slide. And I want to add an animation to this shape. I'm going to add a motion path to my shape. I'll just add a line here. And I want to say that this motion path's duration should be 0.1 seconds. And I can see that this has added a trigger automatically on my slide to move rectangle 1 along line motion path 1 when the timeline starts. So when I preview this slide, you'll see that as soon as it loads, it moves my rectangle along the motion path in 0.1 seconds. I want to add another trigger to my shape. This time, I want to move my shape along the motion path whenever the previous motion path has finished animating. So I'll say move rectangle 1 along line motion path 1 when the animation completes of rectangle 1 line motion path 1. So now if I preview this slide again, you'll see that our shape is now continuously moving every 0.1 seconds. So now I know this is working, I can now move this shape to the side of my slide. I don't want my users to see this, but if I drag it to the side, it will still be working in the background. I'm now going to add a new variable to my slide. and I'm going to call this variable timer. And because I'm tracking the time, I'm going to set this as a numerical variable. So I'm going to change the type from text to number. And I'll leave the default value as 0. So I'll save this. And I'll add another trigger to my shape. This time, I want to add a value of 0.1 to my timer variable whenever the motion path finishes animating. So I'll adjust variable and add 0.1 to my new timer variable when the animation completes of rectangle 1, line motion path 1. So I'll save this trigger. And I want to add a visual indicator of what this variable is onto my slide. So I'll insert a text box in the bottom right-hand corner of my slide. And I'll go to the Insert tab and select Reference to add a reference to my timer variable. And then I'll just format this slightly just to make it a little bit bigger on my slide. And I'll just increase the size of the text box as well. So now when I preview the slide, I can see my timer variable is going up by 0.1 every 0.1 seconds. And that will continue until I reach the third slide. So I'll also add a reference to this variable on the final slide of this scene, so that at the end, my users can see how long the interaction took them. So I'll say, nice work, you have completed the challenge in variable seconds. I'll preview this one more time so you can now see how the whole thing looks. So when I click Get Started, I can see my timers going up and I can click through the interaction, set my language to French and save. And it says, nice work, you completed the challenge in 7.9 seconds. My next task is to find a way to get Storyline to send this variable to Totara at the end of the course. So there are a few things to note before we get started in this section. Firstly, Storyline cannot give decimal scores for questions, which is a bit of an issue for us since we're measuring to the 10th of a second. But we can get around this. So in Totara, our scorn package will be marked out of a total of 100. This means if we create a quiz in Storyline with a total value of 1,000 points, then each individual point in Storyline will be worth 0.1 when we import it into Totara. So we need to calculate a way to get this score into Storyline. So I need to create a series of question slides that can add up to every value between 1 and 1,000 with a maximum score of 1,000. So when I first came up with this idea, I thought I'd need to create 1,000 slides and have each slide with a value of 1 and add all of those up. But I soon discarded this idea because it would take hours to create 1,000 slides, and it would also take a really long time to submit each user's score using this method. So instead, I came up with this. So here we have 14 slides. Each slide has a different value. All of these values add up to 1,000, but they can also combine to create every value between 1 and 1,000. So let's look at an example of how this would work. Let's assume my user gets a score of 67.8. Because we're calculating this score out of 1,000 rather than out of 100, my first step will be to multiply this score by 10 to give us a value of 678. Since 678 is greater than the value of my first question slide, I will mark this slide as correct. And then I'll subtract the value of my question slide, 400, to give me a score of 278. Since 278 is greater than the value of my second question slide, I will also mark this slide as correct, and then take away 200 to give me a score of 78. My next two question slides are worth 135 and 100. These are both larger than 78, so I'll mark these slides as incorrect. Then I'll mark my next question as correct and subtract 50 from a value to give me a score of 28. I'll then mark the next two slides as incorrect since they're both worth more than 28. Slide 8 will be marked as correct, and I'll subtract 20 to leave me with 8. I'll mark slide 9 as incorrect since 10 is larger than 8. And then I'll mark the next slide as correct, take away 5 to leave me with 3. Slide 11 will be marked as incorrect. And then slide 12 will be marked as correct, and we'll take away 3 to leave us with 0. And our last two slides will be marked as incorrect because they're both higher than our value of 0. So when you total the values of all of the questions marked as correct, we'll get our score of 678. So that's 400, add 200, add 50, add 20, add 5, add 3. And so when we import a score of 678 into Totara, this will be marked out of 100, which will give us a score of 67.8. So the first thing I needed to do was to multiply my timer variable by 10 to give me a score out of 1,000. So I'll create a new trigger and I'll add an action. And I'll say I want to adjust my timer variable by multiplying it by 10 when our timeline starts. And then I'll create the trigger. I'll add one more trigger. And I'll say I want to jump to the next slide when the timeline starts. So now when my users land on this slide, their score will be multiplied by 10 and they will be moved on to the next slide. So now it's time for me to start creating the 14 question slides. I'll add a new question. And I'll choose to add a true or false question. On our calculation table, our first question value was 400. So I enter 400 as the question text. And I'll also say that the correct score is worth 400. And then I'll return to the slide view to finish setting up the question slide. I don't need to show any feedback, so I'll delete the feedback layers that were added automatically. And then I'll create a new trigger on my slide and say that I want to change the state of the true radio button. So change state of object radio button 1, which is our true radio button, to the state selected when the timeline starts on this slide. But this should only happen if the value of my timer variable is greater than or equal to 400. If our timer variable is not greater than or equal to 400, then the false radio button should be set as selected instead. So in the else, I'll put change state of rectangle radio button 2 to selected. I'll add another trigger, this time to subtract the value of the slide number from the total. So adjust variable, subtract value 400 from timer when the timeline starts, only if the timer variable is greater than or equal to 400. And then I'll save. I'll then add another trigger, this time to submit the interaction when the timeline starts. And then add one final trigger to jump to the next slide when the timeline starts. So jump to slide, next slide when the timeline starts. So now when a user lands on this slide, if the user score is above or equal to 400, the question will be marked as correct and 400 will be taken from the timer variable. The answer will be submitted and the user will jump to the next slide. If the user score is below 400, the question will be given the incorrect answer, the answer will be submitted and the user will be jumped to the next slide. This will all happen very quickly within about 1/10 of a second. Let's assume I've repeated this setup for all of my other question slides. I now need to add a results slide to the end of this scene to send my results to the LMS. I'll check that all of my question slides are included, and I'll set my passing score as 0. The reason for this is that in my scenario, a lower score is actually better than a higher score. So anything above 0 is good. I'll remove all of the content from the results slide, including the 2 layers. Any navigation buttons I'll also remove. So I'll edit the slide settings and remove the previous and next buttons. and I'll remove the unnecessary triggers. So we're just left with one trigger on this slide, which submits the results of the quiz when the timeline starts. I'll add one more trigger, this time to exit the course after the results have been submitted. My course is now ready to be exported as a SCORM package and uploaded to Totara. So let's assume I've done that. And in my Totara course, I will now upload my zipped SCORM package. And I can do this by dragging and dropping my zipped file into the activity settings page. And you can see here, my maximum grade is out of 100. And I'll save and display so you can see how this looks. So one more time, I'll go through this activity. So I'll get started, change my language to French, and save. And so I've completed it in 6.7 seconds. So let's see if that's now showing in Totara as 6.7 seconds. So when I click go back, you're going to see each question slide being cycled through. Look out for the correct your radio button changing when we get to a question slide that will be marked as correct. If I was making this for real, I would hide these slides from the user just by putting a white shape in front of them or something like that. In the example you saw at the start of this webinar, it had the word loading over it. It will cycle through these slides in about 2 or 3 seconds. So it's not too long. And so we're taken back to our course page. Let's take a quick look at the report for my SCORM package. And you can see my user here with a score of 6.7. So my next job is to create a report, which will act as the leaderboard for my activity. I don't have time in this webinar to set up a report from scratch, but if you do want to learn more about reporting, you can check out our reports course in the Totara community. But here's a report which I made earlier. This was created using the SCORM report source. If I go to the columns tab, I have 2 columns set up. The first one is the user full name, and the second is the SCORM score. Because the lower score is better in my case, the aggregation is set to the minimum, so only the user's quickest time will be shown. If you didn't have any grouping here, then a user can appear multiple times on your leaderboard. You might be okay with this. I've also customized both the headings just to make them easier to understand. So instead of user full name, it just says name, and instead of SCORM score, it just says time. On the filters tab, I have a filter for the title of the SCORM activity, and you'll see why in a moment. So let's view the report. And you can see I've got a saved search set up for this report. The saved search has the name of the SCORM package added to the SCORM title filter. This means that only scores from this specific SCORM package will be shown in this table. And if I scroll to the bottom, you can see the entry from my user account. So if I want to display this on my course page, this is what I'll need to do. First, I'll need to add a new block. So I'll click the plus button and I'll need to add the report table block type. I'll then edit the settings on my new block. I'll customize the title and I'll call this leaderboard. I can also choose whether or not to display my block header or remove a border from a block. I'll leave these as they are and I'll select my report source and find the name of the report which I created. And select the Save Search. Now when I save changes, on the right-hand side of my course page, you can now see my leaderboard and all the users' times who've attempted the activity. If you are watching this webinar on demand, you can feel free to post any questions in that course creator workspace in the community, or you can always @tag me as well to get my attention to a post.
Great, thanks everyone. Well, thanks so much for coming today. Thanks for coming to another webinar. So yeah, the next webinar we have is on Tuesday next week. So normally we run on Wednesday, we're running on Tuesday next week. And we will be going behind the scenes with the University of Nottingham online. We're going to talk to Lewis there, who's been setting up the platform with Catalyst. And we're going to look and see exactly how they went from conception all the way to having their online platform, and also look at how they use audiences, how they use micro-credentials. So that'd be a great webinar if you're trying to get inspiration on something that you'd like to do with your own platform. Come and have a look at what the University of Nottingham Online did and see exactly how they started and where they are now. It's quite impressive. So thanks everyone for coming and hope to see you at another webinar soon.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Jordan.